Today's the day we're going to take an in-depth look at my custom-built 1955 Chevy truck. Stick around. What's up, guys, and welcome back to In the Shop TV. If you're just joining us for the first time, my name is Mike, and that's my 1955 Chevy custom truck that we've been building for almost 2 years now. So over the last few videos, we've been taking on the wiring of this truck and doing a How to Wire Your Truck series, and that series has brought in a lot of new viewers. About a third of our total subscribers have come from those few videos alone. So with that in mind, and this build being about a year and 10 months in, almost 2 years, give or take, I thought it'd be a really cool time to take an in-depth look at everything that we've done from the beginning to as it sits right now, as well as maybe briefly touch on what we have to do going forward. So I've been wanting a Tri-5 Chevy truck for a long time now. I initially fell in love with the 59, which has the dual headlights on each side. And then when I started researching them a little bit more, I really liked that whole era from 55 to 59. When I saw the 55 and 56, I just kind of fell in love with the simplicity and the super clean lines of it with the single headlight and that really nice clean grille that it has. I'd say it looked probably close to 3 years to find this truck, and I found it not too far from here. We're in South Carolina. I found it in Elkin, North Carolina, and an older gentleman that I know had it, and I believe he was the third owner of the truck, which is pretty miraculous considering this is a 70-year-old vehicle. So when I found it, it was all in primer, and it was just basically the cab sitting on top of the frame. He had all the body panels taken off and stored separately sitting on a trailer. The only thing the truck had done to it at that point was he had kind of sanded off all that surface rust, got it down mostly to metal, and shot it with a coat of primer. He did the cab corners already, which is a known problem area on these old trucks. I stuck my head in there to see that if they were welded up correctly, and he did do it right, did good work, so I felt confident in buying it. The frame had some kind of like bed liner coating on it, which was a little bit of a pain when dealing with the frame and painting it, but it was also kind of a blessing because it did keep that frame really protected and pretty much rust-free throughout. So what we did to start the build was we took the cab off. We had just the frame sitting on the suspension. I'm considering this day one because we're starting from the bottom up. We're starting with our chassis. We're gonna strip everything down. There's a lot of brake lines on it, some dirt, clean it up. And I knew right off the bat when tackling a new build, the first thing you wanna do is kind of conceptualize where you wanna go with the truck. And of course, there's some changes come along the way. But I had the general idea is that I wanted to keep as much throwback to the original styling as possible while trying to bring in a lot of modern elements and give it a cool modern look and stance. So with that in mind, I knew the suspension had to go. You have that kind of front solid axle suspension in the front on the original, and if you've ever ridden in a truck like that, they're old farm trucks. They're kind of bouncy and squirrely. It's not really very comfortable. Definitely doesn't handle very well. That had to go, and I knew I wanted to lower the whole truck, so basically all the suspension was gonna go. I mean, we're going this far where we have just a plain raw chassis sitting on the floor of the shop, so I mean, it's worth just a few minutes extra effort or however long it takes to try and straighten that out. So I raised this up and gave it a couple more pumps, and I think I'm pretty happy with how that looks right now. What I did was rather than sell it, I stripped it all down. I found somebody who'd wanted to use it to restore their truck to original status, and I found a guy that came all the way from Oklahoma, drove here to South Carolina. We just gave him everything for free and let him go. He sent pictures after he got home of installing on his truck, and it was just really cool to see those old parts live on another one of these beautiful trucks and give it new life. Once we took all that old suspension off, I had just the frame sitting there on jack stands, and I said, well, it's time to start cleaning up this frame. If there's any rust on it, we had to take care of that. There's a lot of frame rivets on it, which I found a really cool way to deal with old frame rivets. I use a product called a Rotocut, which is kind of like a spot weld cutter or a little hole saw, if you will. All right, guys, I'm using a tool called the Rotocut. I'm not affiliated with this brand or being sponsored or anything. It's just a tool that I found that seems to be working for me, so I thought I'd share it with you guys. It's opened up. And it cuts the perimeter of those rivets off, and then you just kind of left with the shank and the hole. Take a hammer, pound it, and it comes right out. So you know when you're done, when you see that the head of the rivet just kind of loosen up and pop off. And then you're left with the stem right here, and then the hole in the frame where you can just kind of pound it through. Once I got all 8 million trillion billion rivets out of this thing, I started focusing my attention on the front end. I knew right off the bat I wanted to do a Mustang 2 independent front suspension. A lot of people do the Camaro clips where they take a second gen Camaro and they will graft it to the front by chopping the frame and all that. That's cool too. I was just never really a fan of the K-member of the Camaros. Coming from someone who did have a second generation, I was never really a fan of that K-member. So I knew right off the bat I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to get away from that since I had just done one. And the Mustang 2 suspension, with all the aftermarket support that it has, was the right choice for us. So the Mustang 2 independent front suspension that we went with was from Speedway Motors. So we decided to go with adjustable coilovers. The QA1 coilovers. I think these are really nice. I had Viking coilovers on my last build. I would say these definitely compare in quality to the Vikings. I think the Vikings might have been polished up a little bit more, but these are definitely really, really nice. They feel solid construction-wise. See, these are single adjusting, so one knob basically adjusts your compression and rebound all in one. Tubular control arms, they are super beefy. They're 1-inch tubes, which I like, so they're really, really stout. I like that there's a screw-in ball joint. That's a big deal to me. And 2-inch drop spindles in the front. I really wanted this truck to have a nice mean low stance, and so far it's gotten it right where I want it to be. We put together the new cross member in the front and welded that up, and something happened along the way where our geometry was off by about 1/8 of an inch. We've got our line. You're supposed to measure from the center of the spring perch 20 7/8 to the frame. Draw your line up. Then remember, we marked our cross member earlier so that it would line up with our mark, which we are. We did the same thing on the other side. Our frame is level front and back. Our frame is level side to side. We went ahead and marked the center line on the cross member, and what I did is I took this piece of tape, measured across the frame from both sides, and found center there. And we're using a laser level so that we can come over here and make sure that we are dead center on both marks, which it looks like we have to come over this way just a tap. Okay guys, we are dead on centered up. We are dead on right here, dead on right there, dead level this way, dead level that way. Now usually you can fix up to 1/8 of an inch in your alignment, but I kind of was a little bit worried about it. So what I ended up doing, I don't know where I went wrong or what happened, but I ended up moving the T-bolt slots for the control arm. I opened that one up and then welded in some new metal so I can move it over just a tiny bit, and it kind of corrected my problem. Again, I'm not sure how it happened. I had a laser level set up. I took about 1 million measurements. I mean, everything was just right on the money, and somehow, maybe through welding, maybe through the heat and contraction and all that, it just pulled the metal one way or another, and it was off by 1/8. But we got that sorted out, and the geometry is all nice and straight now. So next we painted those tubular control arms. We started mounting our entire front suspension. We put a nice set of Wilwood calipers on there and finished it off with some really nice drilled and slotted rotors in the front. So of course, once we had our front suspension done, it was time to turn our attention to the rear. I knew right off the bat I didn't want to spend a ton of money, so I went to a junkyard. I found a Ford 8.8 out of a 96 Ford Explorer. They're really beefy rear ends. They use a 3 1/4 inch tube. It's 1/4 inch thick steel. The choices of gearing that they offer for those vehicles was 355, 373, or I believe 410 or 411, one of those two. I chose the 373. Give me some nice response on the street, but also be not too crazy on the highway. The axles come complete with disc brakes if you want to roll with the original disc brakes. It's really kind of a very, very inexpensive way to get a really robust rear end in these vehicles without spending a ton. In fact, I think I spent about $200, maybe $220 on that entire axle assembly. Now I did end up shortening it. You don't have to. The actual width from the factory will work just fine with these trucks. But if you want to run a little bit of a wider tire in the rear, what you do is you end up shortening it by 2 7/8 of an inch. And what that also does, if you cut it off the passenger side, I believe it's the passenger side, and then you re-weld the tube on, you don't just narrow the axle, but you center the pinion, because the pinion is a little bit off-centered how it comes in those Ford Explorers. So by doing that, you now have the ability to run a wider tire, and you center your pinion in the middle of the truck. They do offer Wilwood brakes for the 4.8 and 0.8 for that rear, but they're quite a bit on the pricey side for some reason for that rear, and I'm trying to pick my battles and spend my money where I need to spend it and save my money where I need to save it. And that was one of those areas where I said, you know what, I'm going to just stick with the factory Ford Explorer rear brakes. I mean, of course, we got all new factory Ford Explorer rear brakes for it, but nonetheless, we stay with the same style of brakes in the rear. So this is the first part of the build coming up where the build actually took a turn from what I had envisioned in my head, and that's wheels and tires. As you can see behind me, we have a set of Foose F104 Legends. They're 20 by 10 in the rear and 18 by 9 in the front. You know, originally this truck was supposed to have a 5-spoke, similar design, chrome wheel, and the truck was gonna be kind of a metallic cream tri-coat white. And I'm probably gonna do that paint at some point, but these wheels totally made the whole build take a different direction. I saw them, it was an impulse buy, I fell in love with them. That kind of slim polished aluminum band going around it, I don't know, man, it just hit me right in the feels. I had to have them, and I said, you know what if I make all the trim on this truck that was supposed to be chrome and turn it into gloss black, and then we do a satin black body? I think that would be super cool. You don't see that really too often. It's kind of a two-tone black, and I just wanted to roll with that for a while. We'll get to the paint job I did in a little while, but touching on it really briefly, this is kind of an at-home paint job that I did here in the shop, and it's supposed to be a temporary paint job, meaning I want to drive this truck for a few years and just kind of enjoy it. And then I'm not a painter, so I will probably take it to a shop that does paint. Unless I get really good at this in the next few years, I will have them do it and do like a really, really knockout paint job on it in that kind of cream metallic white color with all black gloss trim. I think it'll be super cool looking. Thinking ahead to the rear end, I knew that we had to get our engine mounted, our cab put back on, put as much weight on the frame as possible so that when we do our rear end and drop it, I knew we were gonna have to cut the frame. And to get all that geometry and stance for it just right, we really needed to have the car at its final ride height, and to do that, I needed as much weight on it as possible. So when it comes to the weight in the front, obviously the most heavy component in the front is going to be the engine, so it's time to start focusing our attention on the engine itself. So for engines, as you can see right here, we have an LS platform engine, and I'm kind of an old school guy. I've always built cars that had carburetors on them, and while I don't have a problem with the LS platform, obviously, I'm kind of nostalgic, and I really like that whole carburetor thing, but I knew right off the bat that I wanted this car to be almost a daily driver, if you will. Not a daily driver, I'm not going to take it to the grocery store, but I just want to ride around town as frequently as I can and just enjoy it as much as I can, and that got me thinking fuel injection. So this is a 6.0 LY6, and that's out of a 2007 or 2008 Silverado 2500. I don't remember which year, but they're both basically the same engine. It had low miles on it. When I took the pan off and everything, I started looking it over. The engine was really clean, had full hash marks in the cylinders. It would look great. There was no burnt oil anywhere. I was really happy with it. So the engine's in fantastic shape. I said, you know what? I'm gonna run it stock. I happen to know where it came from. I know the guy who sells these, and I know they're all guaranteed, so I didn't have to really worry about it being a ticking time bomb or uncovering hidden stuff in there. I did spend a little bit more for it because it is warranted. If anything ever happens, I go back to him and he gives me another one. So worth the extra money in that respect. No, I didn't put a big cam in it. This is just gonna be a cruiser for me, guys. I wanna cruise up and down the boulevard, you know, take it out date night, do car shows, stuff like that. Just have fun with it. And believe me, with that 373 rear, this LS has 364 horsepower in its stock form before you do a tune, before headers or any of that cold air intake or any of that other stuff. You know, there's no reason that we can't suspect to be somewhere in the 400 horsepower range on a truck that's gonna be 3,400 pounds total. It's gonna move pretty good as it is. So we stripped the engine down, gave it a coat of paint, got it looking all pretty. Put some headers on it. We went with the Speed Engineering headers. They're really inexpensive and they fit really, really good on these trucks. They hug the block nice and tight. They don't leak. So far, so good, man. I'm really pleased with them. One thing that I found working with LS engines is that if you use compatible things, meaning your engine and your transmission and your computer is all compatible, it came out of that same era or generation of vehicle, it makes doing your LS swaps so much easier. So one of the most popular transmissions that came with these engines, especially in Tahoes and Yukons and all that, was the 6L80, which is an electronic 6-speed transmission. Turned to the same guy for my transmission, why not? He guarantees them, so it just makes total sense to me. The 6L80 that he sold us did have low miles on it, but just to be safe. One of the most common points of failure for these transmissions is the torque converter itself, so right off the bat, I just put a new torque converter in it. Why mess around? There was no material in the transmission, in the pan, nothing. It was nice and clean transmission fluid, but just for peace of mind, I wanted to change the torque converter and start fresh in that aspect. So we got our 6L80 mounted up to our LY6 engine. Everything's all painted, looking good. It's time to place them in the frame, and I'm thinking motor mounts. So again, we got to get as much weight on the truck as we can to start before we can start our rear. So we welded in some motor mounts. I got the cab positioned first because it's kind of relative to where your motor and transmission are going to be. It's a little bit of a bulky transmission and we don't have much of a transmission tunnel in that cab. So I had to get the cab on before I can mount the engine. And everything worked out just fine with that. And I got the engine sitting nice and low for a low center of gravity and everything looks really good and I've got plenty of room. So with the concept of putting more weight on the frame to get our ride height, I started focusing on cooling and putting a radiator and electric fans in the front. I knew I wanted to do electric fans and I really didn't want to do the original style radiator that comes with these trucks, which is that downflow style, where your coolant will flow from top to bottom. I wanted to do a crossflow style radiator, which are those kind of rectangular size radiators, where your coolant will come in on one side, flow across, drop down to the other set of fins, and then come across the other side on the bottom before it returns back to the engine. So I went with the Be Cool 28-inch aluminum LS swap radiator, and I went with the SPA electric fan kit. They move a ton of air, and I was able to save a little bit of money on that premium fan by buying them as a kit or a 2-pack. I had to modify the core support in order to fit that radiator, but it ended up fitting just perfect and it looks great. So that brings us back here to the rear of the vehicle. I knew right off the bat that I wanted to do a 4-link suspension. I didn't want to stick with the leaf spring style suspension. And with dropping the front, we have to drop the rear as well. And one of the hurdles with doing that is that our frame would sit really low on top of the axles. So I had to chop the frame and build a custom step notch. I did that by taking 2-inch by 4-inch tube steel and cutting them at 30-degree angles, as you guys see right here. I put some ladder bars or supports going across the top of it for some extra rigidity. And then I borrowed a trick that welders use when they do actual semi-tractor trailer frames to give them extra support, which is something called the fish plate. Once I had my step notches all welded into the frame and I cut the frame, I then traced out the shape of that step notch, cut an additional piece of 3/16-inch steel to match that profile, and welded it to the face of those step notches on the outside to give it the ultimate in support. So now it was time to turn my attention to our 4-link and getting that installed. I ended up buying an all-in-one 4-link kit. Now, there's nothing wrong with the kit itself, except that when you lower a vehicle, a lot of these kits that come as all-in-one style kits, they're only designed to maybe drop your vehicle a couple inches or something like that. they're not really meant for the drastic ride height change that we're trying to achieve here. So quickly upon looking at my 4-link brackets that they sent us and mocking them up on the frame, I knew that they were going to hang way too low on this frame and be dangerously close to the ground, and that just wasn't going to work for us. So I ended up using all of the bars and the axle mount from that kit, but then I went and got separate brackets for the front, and then I welded up my own cross member and came up with my own mounting system. I would both raise those mounts up higher on the frame and allow my 4-link to sit and get me the ride height that I wanted to. Also, by designing that cross member, I strengthened up the frame a little bit, I boxed the insides, and I raised the height of the existing cross member that was there, taking in mind that when we lower this, that drive shaft is going to come up high, and I want to give myself a little bit of extra clearance under that cross member for the drive shaft. I decided to fabricate a battery tray because I knew right off the bat that this bed is going to be of a hinged bed floor design, so that we're going to fuel our tank from the back. That led to this kind of block off plate that you see right here. I had someone CNC cut that for me and cut that logo into it. It's basically the bow tie with the old script logo, keeping with the valve covers that we have on the engine. And on the back side of it, I mounted a piece of diamond plate with some LEDs behind it, so the whole thing is backlit. Then we fabricated a little door switch, which will look really cool when we go to lift this bed floor to gas up the truck, and that thing just lights up. We then welded on some shock mounts for the rear. We're using adjustable coilovers again in the rear. And I went with some chrome-plated AFCO coilovers for the rear. I think they're about 140 pound spring rate, which is more than enough for a truck like this. We're not going to be hauling concrete and stuff like that. This is just really a cruiser for me, so 140 pound spring rate was more than enough. On a lower truck, I really like the idea of having adjustability on all 4 corners so you get that ride height just perfect. Next, we had to get this frame painted because we're going to start putting everything back together with this truck. And this is one of the parts where having a YouTube channel and building your own vehicle kind of cross paths and sometimes lead to difficult choices. Initially, what I wanted to do was drop this whole frame off of the powder coater, have everything powder coated, and be done with it, and that would have been awesome. But for the sake of having a YouTube channel, I wanted to kind of do different things that an at-home builder watching this might do that doesn't have a big shop, doesn't have a big budget, doesn't have the skill or maybe the know-how. So I kind of copied that kind of mentality and applied that logic to my own build here, and I guess maybe sacrificed my own frame for the sake of making quality content that might be relatable to other viewers. So what did we do? We have 2 different products that we painted this frame with. On the back half of it, we use an appliance epoxy. We did actually scrape down the frame a lot and get it prepped for paint properly, cut all that rust off, cleaned it with acetone, and got it in as good a condition as possible to accept our rattle can epoxy paint. We use the Rust-Oleum appliance epoxy. It's not a true epoxy where it's 2 parts to it. It's actually a 1-part epoxy that uses the humidity in the air to cure and harden. That said, I'm actually really surprised with how well it turned out. It hardened really, really well. It's a great looking finish, and I'm totally happy with it so far. Granted, we haven't been through car washes or been on the road and getting nicked with rocks and all type of stuff, but so far it's held up really, really well, and it looks great. Before we painted anything else, the middle crossover in this truck, I kind of hacked the middle of it out since we're riding a lot lower, and I created a little bit of a custom hoop just to make sure we have extra clearance for our drive shaft. Next, we focused on our fuel tank. This is a 64 to 68 Mustang fuel tank that's designed to run EFI with an internal fuel pump. This entire fuel system is courtesy of the good people at Tanks Inc. They make incredible products. They have pretty much everything you could possibly dream of for your fuel system, for your build. So I decided to plumb the gas tank. We did some soft lines back here at the tank, and right where our step notches are at the frame, we transitioned over to a hard line. I really don't like the idea of having rubber or a hose running all the way up the frame just to protect your fuel system. So we have aluminum fuel lines that we custom bent, ran them all the way up to the frame, and then transitioned over again to a custom bracket that we made that holds our 2 brake lines up front and our fuel line. Then we went back to a flexible hose right at the front of the vehicle on the firewall for vibration reasons. Painting the front half of the frame, we used a completely different product. I really wanted to, again, go back to the idea of, picturing someone in their garage that doesn't have a lot of time, money, or know-how or skills or anything, and just kind of imagine what somebody would do, or imagine what I would have done as a kid when I was messing around restoring cars. So I said, well, you know what? What's a product that's readily available on the shelf that's a little more durable than your average paint, and how can we make it better? So I decided to use a Rust-Oleum tractor paint. And then my logic was, if I add some thinner to it so that we don't get brush strokes, I can go ahead and brush it on the frame like somebody would do at home. And then I add a catalyst or a hardener to it so that it has some kind of protection against the elements and a little bit of shelf life and just give it a nice durable finish. And so far that's worked out really well too. Again, we haven't road tested it. It hasn't held up to the conditions, so I can't say how it's going to work long term, but it's a nice durable finish and it looks really good actually. So at this point of the build, basically our entire skeleton is done. Our frame is sitting on 4 wheels. Our fuel system's plumbed up. We're ready to go. I went and got a harness for the engine. Went to the people at BP Automotive. They make a really, really nice harness. It's plug and play. It's stupid simple to install. The instructions on it are probably the most dumbed down instructions I've ever seen in my life for anything. We primed the oil system of the engine. We added coolant. We took some 18-inch exhaust extensions, clamped them to the headers, threw some cheap mufflers on there just so that we can run the thing in the shop and not blow our eardrums out. We went overboard on electrical system. We used some O-gauge wire, wired up our battery. We have fuses throughout. We wired up our alternator, made a custom bracket for that. We're fused at the alternator and at the battery. And I went crazy grounding this vehicle into what I think is probably the best vehicle ground system money could buy. All this stuff is on previous video, guys. If you ever want to watch any of this stuff and kind of visualize what I'm talking about here, it's all on video. So we filled our tank, hit the key, lo and behold, she started right up. It sounded awesome. So let's turn our power back on. We should hear the fuel pump relay fire up. 2 seconds, that's a good sign. We're gonna pump this twice and we should hear that throttle body blade open up, and that kind of wake the throttle body up. There it goes. Ready? Oh yeah, baby. We're getting close, I promise. So that brings us to the cab. I knew that I wanted to get it painted before I mounted it. So we moved our entire lift over to one side of the shop and put the cab on the other side of the shop on its dolly, cleared everything out, put plastic all over everything, and attempted to start doing our own body work and paint on this cab. As I mentioned earlier, I knew that the guy that had this before me had taken it down to bare metal. So my plan of attack was to put a little bit of a tooth in it. So I took some 320 and scuffed it down as best as I could, and I got it nice and silky smooth. And I went and shot it with a single stage satin black urethane. Single stage is a little bit tricky because you only get one shot at it. You can't really fix it. If you start sanding it or buffing it out, it starts getting glossier. As you guys can see, we did two-tone black. It's gonna be really cool. I went ahead and shot this rear window section in a high solids clear and buffed it out. That was a complete learning experience. I've never shot clear before and it's a pain in the butt, but I think it actually came out pretty good and I really love the look. I should also mention that before I shot single stage urethane, I went ahead and used an epoxy primer that I thinned down a little bit to use as a sealer and sealed everything that was there prior. You always want to use an epoxy anytime you're going over any other prior finish that was already there. Since there was a kind of a mixture between old primer there and some raw metal, I use an epoxy thinned down as a sealer. If you take it all the way down to bare metal, what you want to do is use a straight epoxy primer. Next, I came up with a really cool idea. I know I wanted to have a smooth firewall, but I didn't really feel like welding up all 10,000 of the Swiss cheese holes that were on that firewall existing. I didn't feel like cutting out the existing firewall and welding in a new one. So I was like, you know what? Kind of stealing an idea from the frame video where I did something that people at home could do. I thought up a way that I could accomplish that exact goal while kind of inspiring people at home to do something similar where they can achieve a smooth firewall look without having to go through all that. So what we did was we made a template and we made a bolt-on smooth firewall that went on top of the other firewall. Now, I didn't have any expectations for how this was going to turn out. I've never seen it done before. It was just a kind of a cool idea that I thought might turn out really cool if I executed it right, and it might look really crappy if I didn't. I have to say, I'm really, really happy with how it came out. We used decorative titanium screws to hold it all down. It really looks sharp. You can't even really see them all that much unless you get kind of up on it, but it really turned out good. I'm super happy with it. I did not think it was going to turn out that good. It was more of a test than anything else where I figured I could always cut out the firewall and weld in a new one if it didn't turn out right, but I absolutely love it. Which leads us to the next cool thing about it, which is that this truck originally had its master cylinder mounted on the frame, and you had to kind of pry up this compartment in the floor and add brake fluid whenever you had to do that, and of course you'd spill it all over the carpet and made a mess. I knew I wanted to put it on the firewall. Went through. Then having that double layer firewall gave me some extra strength and rigidity to not have to worry about that firewall flex from stepping on that pedal. So we chose a Wilwood master cylinder. It's a 1-inch bore that works perfectly with our Wilwood D118 calipers up front and our Ford Explorer calipers in the rear. It's super slick looking, really cool. We did some custom plumbing, we bent some lines. A lot of people look at these lines and are like, oh my God, you put copper refrigerator lines in your brakes. No, they're not copper refrigerator lines. They're copper coated steel, and it gives a little bit of corrosion resistance. And then down the length of the frame, we used NiCop, which is a much softer material, which is kind of a blend between nickel and copper. A lot easier to work with, and it doesn't corrode. Trust me, there's no ice maker brake lines in this truck. Now, these old vehicles kind of sounded like tin cans because they essentially were tin cans. So it was really important to me to get some sound deadening put into this thing and some insulation as well. So we chose two different products when we did that. One is kind of the standard butyl product, which is a sticky, kind of tar-like substance that you stick down, and it kind of takes that hollow tin can sound away when you knock on it. Really, really useful product. I got it all over the cab floor, the back wall, and the firewall on the inside, and it really helped out a lot. I've even got some on the roof up there where the headliner is going to be, and it makes a huge difference. On top of that, I've got that silver face product. So I'm gonna start rolling out the foam blanket right now, which is more of a sound deadening material and a heat barrier. I'm gonna see if that makes any difference in actual sound when we tap it. All right, so I just kind of stuck one piece like lackadaisically down. Let's check it out. Yeah, there's definitely a difference. More of a thud when you hit this, more metallic when you hit that. So definitely that makes a difference with the two of them together. We're getting a lot of noise reduction, we're getting a lot of vibration reduction. We should definitely get some nice heat barrier with this foam here too. And it'll also help a lot with temperatures and climate control in the vehicle. What came next? Steering. We mounted up a 28-inch universal tilt steering column, and then we had to kind of custom fabricate our double D rod and universal joints and then get everything to fit just right so our geometry was right so that we could effortlessly steer this thing. We had to put in a power steering pump. We also had to change the pressure output of that power steering pump because the GM style pumps don't exactly play nice with the Ford T-Bird rack and pinion that we have in here, and it might cause it to be a little squirrely or twitchy at high speeds. So we reduced the pressure of the pump with a reducing valve that we got from Speedway Motors, plumbed up the whole system, used some custom lines and some really cool custom washers that prevent you from having power steering leaks. Started it up and the steering feels great and turns just fine and it's nice and quiet. That worked out really, really well. We then showed viewers how we got our engine harness inside the vehicle without actually drilling a hole in the firewall, which is kind of neat. What we did is we took our transmission cover and modified that to be able to snake that harness through and have it be removable whenever we need to for easy access to that wiring should we ever have to change it out. It actually worked out really, really well, and I'm glad that we did it that way because I just didn't want to put a hole in our brand new smooth firewall or even go underneath it and have to seal that up. It just made a whole lot of sense and worked out really well. That led us to our most recent series where we are today, which was we started wiring this vehicle. For that, I used a 22 circuit universal wiring harness from Speedway Motors. It's a really great harness. I've used it in the past on other builds. It gives you a lot of flexibility and future flexibility in terms of how you wire this vehicle. It uses really quality components and it's probably the easiest instructions to follow. Now, I know a lot of people get tripped up on wiring. They really want to burn the whole vehicle when it comes to that point, not even be bothered with it. But in this series, we dumb it down. We make it incredibly easy to understand and to follow so that anyone watching it can wire their vehicle with ease after watching it. It's really simple, guys. It's not that complex at all. And when you watch these series of videos, you'll see just how easy it actually is to wire your vehicle. So far, we got the harness actually installed, laid out, and routed to where everything needs to be, bundled separately so it's nice and easy to follow. We got our high beam switch wired up. We got our brake pressure switch wired up, got the headlight switch wired up, got the headlight wires routed to where they need to be, showed you in the front of the vehicle wiring harness what wires you do need and don't need and how it integrates with an LS engine. We changed out the connectors on our steering column and got that wired up. We started routing wires to the rear of the vehicle for all that stuff that goes on back there, being reverse lights, tail lights, turn signals, all that good stuff. We got our dome light wired up to the switch. We wired up a really cheap and really cool sounding horn. Then we just got done installing one of the coolest, if not the coolest, push button start systems I've ever seen. All right, so we have our key fob here, and I'm gonna go ahead and push unlock. And we have that armed the system, we're ready to go. Now, since we have that brake wire hooked up as a safety, once we depress the brake pedal, this should start flashing. There we go, that indicates that the vehicle's ready to start. Company's called Digital Guard Dog, and they've got a ton of cool products when it comes to push button start. You guys got to check them out. I hate to sound like a salesman for them, but they give us a 20% off discount for viewers of our channel. If you guys are looking for push button start for your vehicles, use my link that'll be in this video and use the code in the shop TV to get yourself a 20% discount on all their products. I think that's pretty much where we're up to in this build, with the exception of our Shelby fake gas cap here, which is actually a charger port. Controversial, I know. A lot of people like that. A lot of people don't like it. Most people are indifferent. I think it's obnoxiously cool myself. There's literally about 135 videos on this build, so I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff that I actually missed, little details here and there. Go check those videos out, guys, and I have an entire playlist that's called 55 Chevy Truck Build if you want to see all of them in succession. I hope that we have about a year to go on this build. We're probably right at about the 60% done part, I would say. From here on out, we're gonna finish doing some wiring, and then the weather's starting to change now. We're getting into spring, and I think we're gonna start working on some body panels and getting that stuff painted up again. We gotta get a drive shaft custom built so we can move this vehicle, and we've gotta get a shifter installed so that we can actually shift our transmission into gear. And then, even though it looks kind of funny like this, we can actually pull it out of the shop and drive it on the road, just for the sake of having another milestone. Guys, if you have any questions, I always answer all the comments as much as I can get to. Maybe I've missed one here or there, but if there's something that I didn't cover in this build that you really want to ask about and you really want to know, shoot me a comment and I'll answer as best as I can. Guys, the channel is growing awesome, and it's all thanks to you guys, and I really want to say thank you so much. I appreciate it a lot. If you could do me a favor and hit that like button, help out a little bit more, leave me a comment, I'd really appreciate it. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you liked this video, and until next time, I'll see you in the shop.